Does misbehaving always end in trouble? I don't know for sure, but maybe after hearing my story, you will have another perspective. My name is Anne, and if there is one thing that is clear to me, it is that I am not a saint. At 55, I've had so many lovers that I couldn't count them on my hands, but that didn't bother me at all until I got married. I thought that after my marriage to William, a man 25 years away, my need to seek refuge in the arms of other men would change. At that moment, I thought I had found the person who completely satisfied me, because during our 2-year courtship, I refrained from having intimate encounters with anyone other than him. However, the monotony of marriage and the daily busyness of work had taught me that I had rushed to say yes at the altar, especially considering that my husband's family did not like that he had married a woman elderly. But there wasn't much to do. William was madly in love with me, and I confirmed that when he caught me being unfaithful with one of my coworkers. He cried for days and acted avoidant, but then he forgave that and all the infidelities that came after, holding on to a love that I don't know if I've ever felt. But despite everything, I had a code: never get involved with my husband's family. That seemed like a piece of cake since none of his relatives seemed to like him. However, everything changed unexpectedly when I saw his nephew. William's sister, with whom I do not have a good relationship, announced to me that her son James, a young man of 24, would come home to take advantage of the fact that it was close to his university, which he would attend for a conference. I didn't like the idea because I didn't like sharing my space with anyone, much less playing the perfect wife, but my husband kept insisting. "Please, it will only be a week," William had begged me. "Why do you have to stay here?" "I already have enough with the children at my work," I replied. "I'll take care of everything, you'll just have to say yes," he told me. And that was the only thing that convinced me to let him stay at our house. Still, I couldn't help but be grumpy at the mere idea of having to feel uncomfortable in my home to give shelter to James, whom I had only seen a couple of times when I was his uncle's girlfriend. However, when James walked through the door, I gasped. He was wearing tight jeans that highlighted his muscular legs and a black short-sleeved t-shirt that showed off some tattoos that seemed to have been recently done. Distressed boots and a leather jacket completed his casual outfit. His brown hair fell in unruly waves over his forehead, and his brown eyes shone with an intensity that seemed to electrify me. He was the living image of rebellion and sensuality, a radical contrast to my husband's formality. At that moment, I knew I was in trouble. "I haven't seen you in years," he said, greeting me with a kiss. I responded smiling, completely forgetting that less than an hour ago I had been grumbling about his stay at my house. "Me neither." "You look great," I said. He repaired me from head to toe without any shame, not even caring that his uncle, my husband, was next to us. "You're not left behind," he replied. My mind started racing from the moment I saw him enter the guest room. Even though my husband's sad look told me that he didn't think it was a good idea to have his nephew in the house now, I didn't care at all. I would get what I wanted, no matter if I broke the only rule I had set for myself. My mission was simple. I started wearing lighter clothes at home, one that I saved for when I went out with my friends to look for new prospects in the city's bars. That way, when he returned from the conference, he would have a good view of what he would be missing if he didn't hurry to grab the signs I handed him. To tell the truth, I'm a voluptuous woman who, over the years, my body has changed. Now my curves are more pronounced, my thighs are thicker, and my chest is bigger. However, I am not ashamed of my physique, even though I was not skinny like I used to be in my younger years. That's why I was confident in liking him as a woman, and I was not wrong. One night when he came home from college, I was in the kitchen washing what was left dirty from my husband's dinner. He greeted me and then swept my body, approving the silk nightgown that hugged my body. I felt powerful and smiled. "Is there anything offered to you, James?" I asked innocently. "Just a glass of milk," he answered after several seconds. That's all? Yeah, it's just that I like it. At that moment, I handed him the glass I had poured for him. He thanked me and then placed his lips on the glass, wetting his mouth with the milk and licking the rest that had remained in the area of his mustache. I like to drink that at night too, I said, hoping he caught what I meant. When I noticed that he had choked a little, I knew I'd been successful and left the room. The truth is that I was not ashamed of being shameless when I proposed it, but I had to admit that that was not my best phrase. I felt kind of stupid for making a comment like that because the last thing I wanted was to push James away without trying it first. However, in the following days, James had taken it upon himself to show me that he knew how to play. His double-meaning comments were very suggestive, making me blush on several occasions. Not being happy with that, my dear nephew had made sure that I felt what he had on several occasions, passing behind my body without any remorse while we were in tight places like the entrance to the bathroom. Those days I couldn't help but call one of my recurring lovers to free myself from that tension I had with James, but even after several rounds I couldn't stop thinking about him, about his voice, about his body. That's why that night, when I came home from seeing my lover, I saw how James was in the living room with his computer. However, when he looked up, his eyes never left my body, and I understood it. That day I was wearing a red dress that highlighted my curves and cleavage, as well as black stiletto heels that made me feel irresistible. The outfit was combined with a pearl necklace that William had given me and some gold earrings inherited from my family. After feeling victorious, I asked about my husband, wanting to make sure he wasn't around to face it and finally confront the overflowing passion that seemed to be growing between us. My uncle? No, he is not here. Where is it? I asked. I sent him to look for clothes. It will take a long time. At that moment, my heart skipped a beat, understanding what was happening. James had taken the bull by the horns, freeing himself from William to have me alone, and I knew that was his plan when I saw him advance towards me and take my body without warning and pull it into his. What do you think if we stop playing? He asked me. I don't know what you mean, I responded, biting my lower lip. His face was so close I could feel his hot breath hit my face. You don't know? He asked rhetorically. You started it. And digging his hand into my hair, he pulled me with him, pressing his lips against mine in a wild way. I did not hesitate to run my hands over his chest, prompting him to take off his shirt and unbutton his pants. He lifted my dress towards my waist as he led us towards the living room counter, but I remembered one detail before continuing. I did it with someone else, I told him. I did it thinking on you. There was surprise on his face, but he quickly composed himself. Without saying a word, he took me to the bathroom, locking it unlocked. He put me into the shower in a violent way that I could have almost hit myself, but there was no time for complaints because the water from the shower began to wet my skin, which was hot. There, with force, and while he kissed me, he removed my insides, and without waiting, he began to wash my center with force, almost as if he wanted to punish me. I felt like for the first time someone was being honest with me, because all the time they seemed to please me even though I behaved badly. When he finished the process, he turned off the faucet and pushed me hard against the wall. One of his hands was on my neck while the other did not leave my parts. He played with his fingers for several minutes while I tried to control the sounds coming out of my mouth, but it was of no use when he lifted one of my legs with his hand and sank inside me. At that moment, I felt like I was seeing stars while James took me mercilessly, almost as if claiming me from the others. The thrusts were arrhythmic and wild, while our bodies echoed in the bathroom. We changed positions many times while I shook myself free with shivers and screams of joy, glad he hadn't done it yet. There, I knew that I had not been wrong to think that he would cause problems because I was sure that no man would make me feel the same way. At that moment, I heard the door of the house open, and that evidently scared James, who looked at me astonished. He wanted to grab his clothes and run away, but I stopped him by holding his hand. "What do we do? He's my uncle, right?" I laughed a little, watching how panic took over his face. I took him in my hands, kissing him softly to calm him down a little. A feeling of tenderness grew in me because he still didn't understand that he was dealing with someone who knew how shameless she could be. "Your uncle doesn't mind this." The truth is that it did bother him a lot. William felt more betrayed than usual when he saw that James had joined my long list of lovers, but his tears were silenced when I promised him not to do it to anyone again. Of course, it was an empty promise, but it was difficult for his nephew to have his uncle never speak to him again or allow him to stay at his house. Me, on the other hand, was not willing to give up James for anything in the world. For this reason, I had stayed in contact with him through instant messaging, and although he seemed sorry for what we had done, he had confessed to me that he had had a good time with me and that it was a shame that we couldn't continue together. That was enough for me to find a way to be together, even when we had to give free rein to our desire in the bed of any hotel in the city. I couldn't lie to anyone, because I had found in James the reason to leave my lovers and focus on one person. Maybe my husband didn't like that, but he wasn't going to find out either. In the end, the problem was not as big as the experience he had gained. James was everything William was not: young, passionate, free. And I felt willing to continue giving my husband a home as long as his nephew continued to care for my needs. This is my story. Now tell me if, like me, you have also fallen into this type of temptations. I read you in the comments. Have you had an impossible love? And if life gives you a chance to be with that person, would you take it even knowing that it could hurt others? I had married Matthew out of pressure because both my family and friends had put it in my head that he was perfect for me. But to be honest, for 10 years my heart belonged to another man, Jaden, my literature teacher. I had married Matthew out of pressure because both my family and friends had put it in my head that he was perfect for me. But to be honest, for 10 years my heart belonged to another man, Jaden, my literature teacher. At that time, he used to dress in his usual impeccable charcoal gray suit that highlighted his distinguished bearing, and his light blue shirt that contrasted with the intense blue of his eyes. He combined this with thin-framed glasses that made him look younger, but it wasn't just because of that I, a shy and introverted 18-year-old girl, fell madly in love with him. Jaden, for his part, seemed to appreciate my enthusiasm. He gave me complimentary comments in class, corrected my writing with patience and dedication, and even invited me to participate in an extracurricular reading group. For me, it was a dream come true. I spent more hours with Jaden than with my own family, while that longing continued to grow inside me with every word, every laugh, every accidental touch of our hands, or any part of our bodies. And yes, I could be very shy but never prudish. I knew that my body craved Jaden's attention because when I was alone, my hands ran over every millimeter of my skin, longing for his hands to guide me until I exploded. However, my entire fantasy was ruined when I found out, the hard way, that he was a married man. "Mayuri, this is not right," he told me, after I gave him a poem declaring my feelings towards him. It was the end of the semester before going on vacation, so I was urgent to have the first approach. "What's wrong with it, Professor?" I asked him. My cheeks were red from the fear and shame I had at that moment, feeling so exposed in front of him. "I am of legal age." "I know, that's not why." Then he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. There I finally saw something that was not there in the previous months. A large golden ring on the ring finger of the right hand. "I'm married," he murmured. "I did it last week." Even as the years passed, remembering that moment felt like a pang in the stomach. Even after dating several guys and finally deciding on Matthew, my mind kept thinking about how Jaden would be with whom I had lost all communication after graduating from college. When I was in front of the altar, I swore that I would never think about him again and would dedicate myself to being the perfect wife for Matthew. But as I said at the beginning, our relationship was far from being perfect. The routine, the stress from work, and the endless arguments ended up putting an end to any cordiality that existed between the two. It was as if he had transformed into someone different since he had become my husband, becoming an aggressive, foul-mouthed person who treated me like the worst scum in the world. At night I cried, looking for comfort, but I knew that not even my family or friends could give it to me. I had given up, resigned to the life I had had to live because of hasty decisions. That's why I never would have imagined that the same life that was hurting me would reward me in the way I wanted it most. That day, I received a message from an unknown number. It was nothing cryptic, but a simple hello that invited me to ignore it like all the others I had received at some point. But the audio that followed after that made my heart want to jump out of my chest. "Courtney, this is Jaden speaking to you. Do you remember me? I'm back in town and I wanted to take you out for coffee if you'd like. I would love to hear from you and catch up. Tell me when you're available. Greetings." I didn't know how to react. I felt like a schoolgirl who wanted to jump and spin in the air while her crush wrote to her. At the same time, I felt my whole body trembling. It was his voice. It was him after many years. I accepted his invitation without a second's hesitation, lying when I told him that I would be available the same day. The truth is that I had things to do, but the need to see Jaden took precedence over anything else. However, when I was getting dressed, my husband came into the room and looked at me curiously. "What's wrong?" I asked him. "Couldn't you dress up a little more?" he said with his usual bored expression. "You always look so bad that my friends ask me if I've given you a good romp lately." I tried to avoid the grimace of disgust that crossed my face after hearing his unnecessary words. "That's how I feel good," I answered, fixing the collar of my shirt. "Will you go out with the girls?" I just smiled. I didn't want to give details because I didn't know how my husband would react to the fact that I was meeting my old teacher. He knew perfectly well who Jaden was, all thanks to my friends who didn't let the topic of my crush at university die. I left quickly towards the address he had given me. It was the restaurant of a beautiful and luxurious hotel that was located in the most exclusive area of the city, something that spoke very well of his current economic status. I thought he would arrive much earlier than Jaden, but when I arrived, I saw him enjoying his coffee. His elegant bearing remained intact, now accentuated by the gray hair that adorned his hair and gave him an even wiser air. But without a doubt, what had changed was his clothing, as he wore beige pants, a blue shirt rolled up to the elbows, and a gray sweater that highlighted the color of his eyes. It was like seeing a Jaden who was more casual and relaxed than the one who taught classes at the university. "You look beautiful," he told me after greeting us. "You were very pretty before, but now you are even more beautiful." That was enough to make me blush again. It had been a while since a man had last given me a compliment, especially considering that in my husband's eyes I wasn't pretty or anything like that. That had made me feel special, but I soon pushed that thought out of my mind. I couldn't think that way about a married man, much less if I was married too. During our conversation, it seemed that time had not passed. He remained a cultured man with whom you could talk about almost any topic. I learned that he had retired the year after I graduated and that he dedicated himself to being an editor at a large publishing house in the capital. For my part, I felt self-conscious about telling him about my work experience, since I had not achieved anything I'd set out to do during my university years. However, Jaden encouraged me to do it. So, over a couple of craft beers, I vented about what had happened to me in my writing career in the years that had passed. When I finished my story, I decided to drink the entire end of my beer without pausing, something that was undoubtedly starting to make me tipsy. "I could help you," he said suddenly. "Help me? How?" I asked. "I have a vacancy at the publishing house that is perfect for you. It is not a writer's job, but as a worker, you will be able to submit some manuscripts to be evaluated by the team. Would you like that?" It was there when I remembered why it had been Jaden and not someone else. The way he used to behave with me, being so special and attentive to my needs, captured my heart like no other. My eyes filled with tears because I had realized, too, that it had been in vain to try to forget him. I did not do it. I still wanted to get some attention from him. "I would love that," I finally said. "Come, let's go to the room and I'll show you the documentation." My body became so stiff that I felt like I was heavier than normal. He knew that there was something indecent behind the proposal, and although that was not the initial intention with which he had gone to meet me, he was not so innocent as not to think that the possibility existed. He held out his hand for me to take, and I hesitated for several seconds, but in the end I accepted. Upon contact, I felt like my skin was hot and his was cold, generating a delicious sensation that made me clear my throat. I shook my head. I couldn't be lusting after a married man, and I had to respect my husband. But as I walked hand in hand through the hotel in search of his room, I felt more willing to forget that. That's why when we got to the room and he closed it, I turned to face him and discover what his true intention was. "And good? Where are the papers?" "The papers are here," he said, pointing to a suitcase. "But you can see them in the morning." I smiled sideways. I knew it. I knew exactly what he wanted because it was something I had been craving for 10 years. However, deep down, my hurt teenager wanted to throw a tantrum, remembering the way he had rejected me. "In the morning?" I asked, feigning confusion. "And what will we do now?" He approached with a mischievous smile. I suppressed mine, adjusting my mind to the idea that he was trying to seduce me. "Now?" he said in a whisper, taking my waist and pulling it to his body. "Now we will do what you always wanted." I started to laugh without removing his hands from my body. "But we're both married, and you said—" "I know what I said," he whispered again, but this time in my ear. "But now I'm not going to let that stop me." His voice wandered through my body until it reached my insides, one that began to get wet with every second that passed in Jaden's arms. Then he placed a kiss on my earlobe, drawing several moans from my mouth that continued to come out once he went down my collarbone. It wasn't long before that same mouth was on mine as his hands lifted my body, forcing me to embrace him with my legs around his hips. My hands did their thing on his neck, deepening the kiss and forcing our tongues to play for a while. After several seconds in that position, I felt the softness of the mattress on my back, while Jaden's skillful mouth ran over my abdomen. He licked my burning skin while my legs joined together, seeking the friction they needed to climax. But Jaden's hands didn't allow me. Instead, Jaden pulled my insides down and suddenly opened my legs, leaving me already exposed to his mercy. With another mischievous smile, he placed his tongue on a specific lump, whose nerve endings made me scream with pleasure. It was a delicious torment that I could not endure for long. His tongue licked every inch of my center, while his fingers played with my legs that were kept wide open. When I got free, I thought he wanted me to return the favor, but seeing him drop his pants and show off his manhood made me realize that my dream would come true. And so, in that same position, he slowly sank while we both looked into each other's eyes. Jaden seemed to be a different person in private because with each thrust from his mouth came the dirtiest words that I would have ever imagined hearing from a man as elegant and cultured as him. But I couldn't lie. I loved that. I continued enjoying the swing of her hips, ones that knew how and when to go deeper to make me scream even louder. A considerable amount of time passed before we exploded almost simultaneously, laughing into a knowing kiss we shared as we came into each other. That was the first of many times I would share with Jaden before making the decision to separate and move to the capital. After months of struggle, I was finally doing what I wanted with my life in a job where I felt more fulfilled and distanced from people like Matthew who gave me nothing. And of course, I met Jaden's wife, an older woman who warmly welcomed me the day I arrived in the capital before my move arrived. During the week we shared together, she treated me as if I were her daughter, although I had no idea that when she was sleeping, her husband visited me in my room to burrow into me all night. Now that I think about it, in the end, I didn't care who would get hurt from what we were doing because I was paying a debt I owed myself. That's all for this story. Tell me if you've been through a similar situation. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to see more stories like this.
I'd already know why you're here, so I'll skip the details and try to get straight to the point with what you're most interested in knowing. Dad, my little sister, Kim, and I always go to Aspen for winter break. Last Christmas, our new stepmom and her daughter, Asia, joined us on that trip, and why should I lie? My stepsister is very pretty and things got out of control between us. Turns out, if that weren't enough, it was the first time Asia and I had seen each other in person, since she is a medical student in another state, and this would be our first family vacation since my dad married her mom. Anyway, the day before our trip, I was in charge of looking for Asia at the airport. I had heard a lot about her, but I never paid attention or was interested in seeing her when our parents had video calls. Going out in the winter is a pain, but I was the only adult not working that day, so I bundled up and rode my motorcycle to the airport. During the time I sat there, I estimate that automatic doors opened and closed about 200 times until, finally, Asia appeared. I couldn't believe the spectacular woman who was walking towards me. I even looked sideways to check that she wasn't looking for another guy, but no, she was coming to meet me, and that was none other than my stepsister. I scanned her with my eyes from head to toe. The girl was tall, thin, and with curves that would leave anyone unrestrained. She had long brown hair below her shoulders. That day she was wearing jeans that fit her perfectly in the right places, and oh my gosh, a bad girl face that could graze dead people, if you know what I mean, and believe me, before I met her I was like that. The effect that I am describing to you was not only had on me, because I could see other men in the place who turned to look at her as soon as she appeared through the door. "You must be Roderick, right?" she said and fanned me with her eyelashes. "I am myself. Welcome to California and the family, I suppose." I told her and blushed. I felt stupid. We walked to the parking lot and I got on the motorcycle, turned it on, and waited for her to put on her helmet and get on to take off on the way home. As soon as she got on, I could smell a waft of her perfume. She smelled like flowers and I was delighted, wishing she would hug me. "Hold on tight, we're not far away," I told her, and as soon as she put her arms around me, I started to ride. While driving with such a goddess on my motorcycle, I felt like a complete Casanova. In the rearview mirror, I could see her hair blowing in the wind, but best of all, I could feel her pair of melons resting on my back. I wasn't entirely sure, but they felt big and squishy, just the way I loved them. As you can imagine, I took the longest route and tried to brake abruptly at each traffic light so that her body would stick even more to mine due to inertia. I know it, and I won't hide that I had intentions with her from the beginning. Asia's arrival at the house was like a spark, and I seemed like I was made of gunpowder. It awakened an instinct in me that I didn't even know about. When she met with the family, everything was as you can imagine. Hugs, kisses, and long talks around the table during dinner or in the living room before going to bed. Like I said, I'll spare you the boring details and give you the spicy details you're dying to know. The guest room that Asia would occupy was on the ground floor of the house. The rest are upstairs. That night we had to go to bed early because the next morning we would fly to Aspen. I was eager to spy on her, so I pretended I was going to take out the trash when I heard that she had gone into the room. I left the bag at the entrance and walked around the house to the backyard, which faces the guest room window, and I prayed to Cupid's angel that she hadn't closed the curtains so I could see her. I must have done something right, because when I arrived, they were still wide open and Asia was right on the other side of the window. I took a few steps away, without making a sound, just in case she looked out, so she couldn't see me. I hid behind the oak tree we have there and got ready to enjoy the show. At that moment, I thought she didn't know I was watching her, but judging by what happened next, it's possible that not only did she suspect it, but it also amused the mischievous girl. Asia unpacked a pair of tiny two-piece pajamas and put them on the bed, then sat on the edge and took off her shoes. She immediately stood up and unbuttoned her jeans with her back to me. He began to slide them down and lean forward. That rear could easily be confused with the full moon in that position. My heart started beating faster and I felt something throb in my pants. What she did next was take off her blouse, revealing a lace bra that fit perfectly, and turned to face the window, as if she could have heard my prayers. What I had imagined when we came on the motorcycle was true. She had a couple of melons that wouldn't fit in my hands, but I began to fantasize about having them in other parts of me where I know how much I would enjoy them. Just when I thought things couldn't get any better, and had already begun to touch myself to calm the emotion that had been building up inside me at that sight, Asia unhooked her bra and released her melons, which fell a little due to the weight before the force of gravity. At the same time, I dropped my jaw and opened my eyes wide. I had to speed up the pace at which I was moving my hand, and I avoided blinking so as not to miss a single second of what I was seeing. I even felt my eyes water a little, but I managed to finish just before she went into the bathroom to get a shower. When we arrived in Aspen, we stayed in the same cabin as always, only this time Ken would share the room with Asia. The place is sensational. It is equipped with all kinds of luxuries that I was really going to take advantage of on this occasion. The first day of vacation we went skiing, but Asia had never done it before, so I offered to teach her with the intention of approaching her as much as I could, without making it too obvious. When you have no experience, you should practice at the bottom of the mountain before going up. So Ken went with our parents and we stayed at the foot of the snowy mountain. Listen, this is the posture you should imitate. Make sure you bend your knees and counterbalance with your back. That will help you balance. I told her, showing the position with my own body, so she could do the same. The truth is that he wasn't bad at it, and in fact, she mastered it quite quickly. I'm no expert either. I was just taking advantage of the opportunity to be hand-to-hand with her. Every chance I had, I approached her with the intention of correcting her and took advantage of touching her on the lower back, between her legs, and even rubbing her a little. If it hadn't been for the suits being quite padded, nature would have exposed me because even though it was freezing outside, I was warm. But my fever at that moment was nothing. Things were about to get even hotter. When I saw that Asia was shivering from the cold and her nose had turned red, I suggested we go to the sauna and she immediately agreed. We entered the resort, put the skis aside, and put on swimsuits. You can imagine what Asia looked like in that tiny bikini. I got excited before entering and had to put my hands in front of me to hide it. The buttons on her two big friends were marked on the fabric by the cold, and the bottom barely covered what was necessary. I had to make an effort to contain my desire to slap her when she passed in front of me to enter the steam room. The elevated temperature was pleasant, but I was already getting warm inside at her image. I took her by the hand to sit together, because in there you can't see anything but the steam, and that's exactly what I expected. I sat as close to her as I could. There were other people in the room, so we had to be discreet, but that didn't change the fact that no one could see us. I began by sliding my hands over her shoulders, massaging her to relax her. This will help your muscles not hurt tomorrow from skiing. I whispered in her ear, and I must have sounded convincing because I could feel her relax in my hands. The steam in the room had already begun to have its effect. Our skin expelled moisture and mixed with that of the environment, making it even easier to touch. I continued touching her back with the excuse of massaging it, and I went down until I reached the lower part. By that time, and with the little oxygen there was, I felt like I needed to breathe faster, but the heat was burning my nostrils, so I did an effort to calm down. I thought I could make it, but at that moment I felt Asia move closer to my ear. I've seen the way you look at me, and I've already realized that your friend below is just the way I like it. Do you want me to give you a hand? No one will notice in here. You just have to stay quiet. She told me, and I stiffened immediately. That whisper ran through my spinal cord and directly impacted my most sensitive part. Would you? Would you? I stuttered, and she began to slide her hand closer and closer to my most sensitive part, until she reached the place where I had been feeling palpitations for a while. I didn't need to help her. She alone removed the shorts and began to play with her hand with the perfect pressure, and at a pace that was driving me crazy. I began to feel the desire building up, and I'm sure she could also feel me tense between her hands. I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity and stretch my hand to her melons. I really needed to caress those that I had wanted so much. When I realized that she hadn't pushed me away, I began to caress and knead them, reveling in the sensation. Having her within my reach had excited me even more, and Asia must have noticed it, because she immediately increased the pace, and I started to feel dizzy. I was short of oxygen, but I was enjoying it so much that I didn't want it to end. However, I couldn't hold back any longer. She wasn't going to let me go until she got what she wanted, and she wouldn't slow down either. On the contrary, she did it faster and faster, until I slipped through her hands. At that point, I inevitably let out a small complaint that I covered up with a stifled cough, and some people in the room may have realized what was happening, because they immediately left. I didn't mind in the least. We put on our clothes and left too. Amid all the steam, no one would know for sure what had happened in there, or who had been involved. After that approach between Asia and me, I felt addicted. I wanted more of her body, and as you might imagine, I made up another excuse to feed my fantasy with her. On the penultimate day of vacation, I pretended to have hurt my foot skiing, so that on the last day my parents went with Kim to take advantage of the snow and left me alone in the cabin with Asia, who would take care of me like any good medical student. My plan went exactly as I had thought, and the day before returning to California, I found myself with my stepsister in a luxury cabin to ourselves. I'm going to skip the parts where I pretended to have pain in my foot, just so she would come over and let me lay my head on her soft, squishy melons. I asked her to come with me to the jacuzzi, and she agreed to mess with me. When I was inside, I took off my shorts and was in my birthday suit. Asia gave me a wicked look and immediately took off her swimsuit top to feast my eyes on. I slid until I was practically on top of her and put my hand between her legs. As if on reflex, she kissed me. I loved feeling the warmth of her lips, which were extremely soft and fleshy. I took one of them between my teeth, and then I continued exploring her mouth with my tongue. She wrapped her arms around my neck, and I settled down to start the action. Although it was difficult to move in the water, we did it slow and intense, and I swear I enjoyed it like never before. The water was at high temperature, but we were even more so. We exchanged places to make things easier for us. She was on top of me, and her lilting movement made me vibrate. I was extremely on cloud nine. I couldn't believe what I was doing with her. We agitated the water much more than the whirlpool could do. I felt like a horse that had been locked up for months, and she was a mare that needed to be tamed. I took her by the waist and leaned her against the edge of the jacuzzi, her back to me, and when I had her just the way I wanted, I projected all my desires at once, without contemplation. She let out a scream, but she let herself be carried away by my rhythm. I held her hair and she begged me not to stop until I finished. Who am I to deprive her of reaching her peak? Her plea got me even more motivated, and I increased the pace as fast as I could in the water. I felt her shake and tremble. She was reaching the top, and I was beginning to cramp when I felt my soul slipping away. At that moment, she sighed with force and she fainted exhausted in front of me. That was my signal to let her go, and I was satisfied. What do you think of my story? Would you dare to risk everything to get what you want so much? Leave me your comment and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and until next time.